Thank you, Chair. We're now live on YouTube for this afternoon's meeting.
Thank you very much indeed, Wendy. We are now back for the second part of our meeting. For those people who missed the first part, it was a presentation from various developers of sites that they would commend to us to be brought forward in the next stage of our local plan. If I can remind members that, subject to discussion and their own feelings on this, I am going to propose at some point that our first recommendation is not as in the report where it mentions the word endorsement, but that it is that the Strategic Planning Committee recommend that the proposed site allocations in this committee report may proceed to consultation. And I hope that might make this afternoon's discussions slightly more straightforward. So, agenda item 8, the site selection for the emerging East.
Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Chair, sorry to interrupt. May we take a roll call and an indication of anybody in the afternoon session needing to declare a declaration of interest?
Absolutely. Wendy, a roll. Thank you, Mrs. Shaw.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
Present.
Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor Allen.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Bailey.
Present, same declaration as before.
Thank you. Apologies from Councillor Blakey. Councillor Hayward.
Present, same declaration as previously. Thank you.
Councillor Howe.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Ingham.
Present, no declarations.
Councillor Lawrence.
Present, no declarations. Thank you.
Councillor Ledger.
Present. I've got one more, if possible. I didn't see that the Axminster carpet sites has been added to the Axminster. My father rents land off Axminster carpets, so that will be an effects and prejudicial NRI.
Could you just give me the reference? 07. Lovely, thank you.
Sorry, I missed that reference. What was that? Sorry, Councillor Ledger.
Axminster 07, Axminster Carpets Factory. My father has the scaffolding.
Sorry, I got that one. Thank you. Councillor Moulding.
Present, no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt. I can see he's in the meeting. Okay, I'll come back to Councillor Pratt. Councillor Skinner.
Same as before. Present, same as before. Declaration before. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Pratt, I can see you're unmuted now.
Yeah. No declarations and present.
Thank you. Can I just check with other members who have recently joined us, if anyone else has any declarations, could you just raise your electronic hand? No hands raised. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Wendy. Right, now we go to agenda item 8, site selection for the emerging East Devon Local Plan 2020 to 2040, interim findings at Tier 1 and 2 settlements, pages 10 to 318. The recommendations you can find on page 9, I believe, of your agendas. And we start off with a brief report from Ed Freeman. Over to you, please, Ed.
Thank you, Chair, and afternoon, members. Yes, I will try and be brief. Just to sort of talk you through the report briefly, I suppose. I mean, obviously, the key purpose of today's report is to determine which sites go into the draft local plan for consultation in October, and which members wish to include as potential preferred allocations, and which are perhaps other sites that we include and seek views on. With that in mind, obviously important to bear in mind that this isn't a final decision on any allocations. There will be further opportunities to review all of these sites post-consultation and leading into a final draft plan that goes out to consultation based on our current timetables towards the end of next year. So none of this is final. This is about seeking views on which we think are the realistic options to take forward through the plan. So the methodology we've used in terms of identifying sites, sifting through them, and then assessment is set out in section 2 of the report and in more detail in appendix 1. So I won't go through that, but happy to take any questions that members have in terms of that process. And obviously you've had the presentations this morning, which I think have highlighted a lot of the key issues that will come through as we go through the sites in terms of how we balance a lot of these issues in terms of landscape designations, environmental impacts, infrastructure provision, etc. One thing I would pick up on just from this morning is there are lots of questions about infrastructure delivery and affordable housing. I suppose I would just flag up that obviously all of these sites are going to have an impact on infrastructure. I think that goes without saying. Across the board, they will all have an impact, and in some way, those impacts will need to be mitigated. In terms of the planning process, obviously they will all need to pay contributions under the community infrastructure levy, which will be spent through decisions that you as a council will make in the future on delivering infrastructure across the district, particularly in terms of that infrastructure that's not being delivered on the site itself. And then we have section 106 agreements that secure the delivery of affordable housing and other infrastructure within the site itself. One of the things we obviously need to do working forward with this local plan is set a level in terms of that affordable housing. As has been said earlier, we haven't set that level yet. That is subject to viability testing and assessment work that will need to be carried out as we move forward through the plan. So the current local plan is 25% in the low value areas, 50% in the high value areas, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to carry that forward. We need to do viability testing and make recommendations on that. So my point is, I think those are universal issues across all of these sites for housing, and therefore, while they are no doubt important issues to you and your communities, they're not necessarily going to be significant in terms of selecting sites for allocation, because those issues will apply to some extent to all of them. So I just flag that up. I think another key issue that came out this morning was in terms of the weight to be given to areas of outstanding natural beauty. And clearly we've quoted on the bottom of page 14, the government guidance and the National Planning Policy Framework with regard to the great weight that should be given to conserving and enhancing landscape and scenic beauty in national parks, broads and areas of outstanding natural beauty. Areas of outstanding natural beauty make up only 15% of England, is our highest landscape designation, and so we should not be looking to allocate sites in AONBs lightly. Having said that, you will see from the report and the assessment that we've done that we are really struggling to find enough suitable sites to meet our housing needs across the towns. And no doubt we'll go through the towns in a moment, so I won't go through those specifically, but just to highlight the shortfall and the issues we have in terms of housing numbers. Members may recall with the working draft local plan that I presented last December, I think at that time we felt we had a shortfall of housing sites in the region of about 900. We're now in a position of a shortfall of nearly double that. Based on our assessment of the towns where we have not been able to find as many suitable sites for allocation as we were hoping that we would in the work that we've done at the working draft stage. And I think that comes through in the assessments that you'll see for the towns. In some cases, there were quite disappointingly low numbers of homes being delivered on preferred allocation sites, particularly in Exmouth as our only tier 1 settlement. The proposed number there is obviously much lower than we would have expected or hoped for a town of that scale and significance in terms of the services and facilities and jobs available in that town, given that some of the main objectives for this plan were around addressing the climate change emergency, so trying to locate development in most sustainable locations, and increasing self-containment of towns. And it's difficult to see in some cases how that's going to be achievable, given the limited opportunities for growth in a number of those settlements. And that raises a number of questions that we then highlight or start to bring to members' attention towards the end of the report about that shortfall and how that could potentially be made up in terms of options. And no doubt these are really just to bear in mind at this stage, so that I think as committee are going through the towns and the sites, we're very clear in terms of the evidence. If we're taking a site out of the mix for the proposed allocations, that obviously has connotations in terms of that shortfall and potentially making that bigger. So we need to be careful that there's an awareness of that as the committee go through those sites, and what implications that will have, because the options are set out in paragraph 5.24. A number of them perhaps aren't very attractive as ways of making up that shortfall. And so there are implications as we review the sites of taking them out of the mix, or indeed adding them in, that would help with that mix. But clearly you won't have the full picture until we bring our assessments of sites at tiers 3 and 4 in the settlement hierarchy to your next meeting, to then consider all of those options in detail. Hopefully that's a useful introduction into just some of the headlines of this. I won't take up any more time, and hand back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. So at the risk of labouring this point, and forgive me, I think we need to work out as a committee, really by consensus, where we want to get to at the end of this process. I don't wish to in any way dictate what happens here, but I wonder if it would be helpful if I can just get an indication, perhaps just by a show of hands or something, if a couple of recommendations it might be worth us thinking would be helpful at this stage. And the first one, which I've read twice, is that we recommend that the proposed site allocations in this committee report may proceed to consultation, including the second best sites. That's the first one. The second one is that SPC notes that the sites are not agreed by the council at this stage, but are suitable for consultation. Now, there's some heavy hitters here who've done a lot of planning in the past, and I'm wondering if anybody, or still do, I'm wondering if anybody thinks anybody else would like to comment on that direction of travel.
I will, Paul, if you like, and I will on the basis. I will on the basis. I think the comment that the recommendations you're putting forward are very, very sensible. They take the seriousness of what we're doing today, which is important. They take on board what we're trying to achieve in trying to get through as many sites as you can, and that's really important. And it also takes to the next level, is saying that this is not committee, which has been suggested by one or two members before, that this sort of ends up that once we get past this stage, it's all done and dusted. It's not all done and dusted, and you've been very clear on that right from the outset. And I think it's a very sensible move to make in the circumstances and the time we've got allocated to us in getting through this process. So I'm on board with what you're saying. I think it's a very sensible approach.
Okay, thank you, Philip. I'll just take some other views. Councillor Mike Howe, please.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I actually endorse what you're saying. It's a bag of hard choices. We've got no other little other options but to commit ourselves to consult on options many of us don't like, quite simply. But the other flip side of this is if we don't get enough allocations, and we're caught all directions at this minute in time. You know, we've got a proposal of a new town that's going out to consultants to have a look at and all the rest of it, but that will only have a limited amount of development capacity for the years we're talking about in this new local plan. Or we're going to come to the next stage when we're talking about the tier 3 and 4 facilities or villages, I should say. You know, obviously Rockbill and Wimple is mentioned in here explicitly because they got train stations who have less facilities than the towns we're currently talking about with these allocations that we all get. We're all going to discuss and go, we don't like. But I do want to pick up a slightly different attitude, and that's not from what you've just said. I think that's the sensible way forward, and we need to do it. My frustration, and I'm kind of hoping maybe Jess Bailey will pick this up, and maybe one or two others, is the urban capacity study that goes alongside this report. And in fact, Ed's excellent but understood remarks in presenting this item, because nowhere are we grasping the nettle for the next local plan in planning our genuine town centres that need attention, you know, and the likes of Magnolia Centre is the one that always comes to mind every time I go down Exmouth, and I was only down there yesterday, funny enough, having a lovely coffee. But we need to grasp that nettle and start working on the major town centres, the real urban areas where we can deliver value, economy, and homes. And that is what is not happening, and we need to start doing that. So sorry about my lecture, but yes, totally agree with what you're saying.
Okay, thanks, Mike. On Exmouth, as you know, there is a big piece of work happening around that, led by Jerry Mills. But I take your point on that. Councillor Dan Ledger, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just following on from Councillor Howard, I don't think Ed will like us very much for it, but there is a piece of work that can be done there where we look at potential sites for compulsory purchases that need to be done through this plan, because we are planning for the next 20 years. And I know compulsory purchases aren't going to happen overnight, so we do need to be planning for a strategy for coming through, and that's something that I'd like to see put into policy within this local plan. Coming back to your suggestions, very happy with the way of travel you suggested, Chair. The only addition to that is, could we possibly, other than the sites that officers are suggesting, add in, flip it on its head really, and consult on potential sites that aren't currently acceptable for officers that we as a committee might like to see come forward as well. And then we are opening it up as wide as possible so that we are gaining consultative opinions on the widest amount of sites as possible. I think that's what I'd like to see.
Councillor Ledger, if you could, if you'd be so minded to draft a line along those views, might be helpful that we could discuss later if committee's happy to do so. I must confess this discussion has gone out into urban capacity studies, Exmouth and compulsory purchase, which I hadn't expected, but it's actually very fortuitous, I think. Councillor Jeff Young.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that we're taking this plan to consultation, and to eliminate sites now would seem to be a bit premature. Yeah, there are some that are absolutely no-goers, but there might be potential in some of them. So now, the least we take out now, the more people can consult on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Megan Armstrong, please.
Yeah, I did put my hand up right at the beginning of the meeting because I wanted to speak before Councillor Skinner did.
Oh, sorry, Megan, they're all over the place.
It's all right. I just wanted to ask, then it's probably been answered now. Why are we being asked to accept all these recommendations for consultation? I don't understand really why. Because there must, because I thought, I'm sorry, I'm not on this committee obviously, but I thought the idea of this afternoon was for all members to discuss the ones that have come up and they've been recommended so far, so that we can cut some out. So some that are really, even if the officers think they're all right, we might not, and we're the final decision makers. So I'm not quite sure why we're putting everything forward. Have I just misunderstood something there?
We haven't got enough. We're short.
What was that, Mike?
But the moral dilemma then is, do we just accept stuff that we know is absolute rubbish and it's going to cause chaos in the communities where these developments are going, and we face it out with the government, or what? Do we just keep saying, yes, bring it all on, let's have as much rubbish as you like,
No, I'm very happy to give you my clear view from the chair on this, Megan, which is that we won't accept, this committee won't accept, and this council won't accept any rubbish. But I do think we have done it in a different way this time, and we brought it forward quite early and quite transparently. I would worry, conversely, that if we today start just knocking things out as a very small committee after all the work by the officers prior to consultation, in which we can all absolutely welly in all guns blazing, saying, well, that one's rubbish, I think that may take it a bit far the other way. So that would be my answer to that. But
it's stuff like building on the green land and stuff like that. You know, are we going to accept that? Is that acceptable? Because to me, it's not. It's things like that, real basic stuff. But I'll leave it for now. But I've said a bit.
Yeah, no, I think I'm sure that's, and Ed captured that earlier as well. So, you know, we've had, haven't we, the great sort of sacred cow of building either on or on the fringes of the AONB. That's come up today, but we're not going to make any decisions about that, proving it. But you know, who knows where that's going to go. But I worry about closing down discussion too early.
I agree with that.
And the point about having this discussion, yeah, thank you. And the point about having this discussion now is that then for the rest of the afternoon, you can absolutely, absolutely welly into some of these sites, to get stuff on the record early doors, in a privileged position as members of the council. Councillor Jess Bailey, please.
Thank you very much. Can I just very quickly ask Ed Freeman a question about the urban capacity study, because that looks as though it's been updated since I last looked at it, and since it last came to committee, because it seems to include information about land that's owned by different local authority, well, obviously including East Devon. Has it been updated?
Through you, Chair, I mean, it's a sort of fluid document in the sense I think we brought in a draft, and obviously we've been out for a further call for sites and further information coming forward. I'm not aware that it's formally been updated in any way, so I'm not sure that what's online is necessarily any different. I'd have to check, but I'm not aware of that. But it is kind of a fluid document in that as more information comes forward, we've done further call for sites, as you know, then obviously that information needs to feed into that. The brownfield land register that's on the website is updated on a regular basis as well. So this the whole situation, I suppose, in terms of the evidence base of the local plan is fluid and being updated as we go.
Okay, thank you. So if I could just say, I envisaged that this afternoon that we would be having a general discussion, and then we'd be moving to talk about the individual towns. So I personally wouldn't be happy just to go out to consultation without any of that discussion, prior to any of that discussion taking place. And what I would say as well is what really came across very clearly from this morning's meetings is the extent of urban sprawl that's going to be facilitated probably by this local plan. It's virtually, I think, apart from one developer this morning who was talking about, our Devon County Council was talking about Millwater, it was all greenfield development pretty much right on the edges of all of our settlements. And that for me is a fundamental problem. And I know that I always say this, and it completely ties in with what Councillor Howe said, that we haven't done anything to generate housing in our settlements. There's no regeneration at all, and that also picks up on what Councillor Ledger said. And I have a fundamental issue as well with the way the sites have been assessed, and this isn't a specific, one town versus another town. I've been looking at the 20-minute neighbourhood the last day or so, and actually I think our assessments are wrong, because it shouldn't be that the sites have been assessed on the basis of are they more than 1,600 metres away from facilities, but that is not the 20-minute neighbourhood. The 20-minute neighbourhood is 800 metres there and 800 metres back. So we're I think storing up a huge problem for the future, because actually the nature of the development that's come forward is all around the periphery. It's miles away, including in Exmouth, including in Ottery, including in various other towns, from the facilities. And we should be, with the climate change emergency, be getting away from car-based travel. So my concern is that we have got a problem, and I'm reluctant to go out to consultation until we've actually grasped that problem. And I still don't feel that we've had a proper look at our town centres, where actually potentially, and I know Ed will say that that's difficult, like how can we develop our town centres to get away from destroying the green fields of East Devon? And we've seen in 11 years or 10 years in the census that our population has gone up. We've had really, really substantial development, and we need to protect our countryside. So I have an issue with the direction of travel as a whole in terms of too much peripheral development, including in Exmouth. And I also have an issue with kind of committing at this stage. We've had a whole morning of developers talking. I'd like our committee to talk before we start talking about what we're recommending. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you for that, Jess. I agree with everything you said. What I'm just trying to get to is a point that we don't end up trying to just tear sites by preference out of various things prematurely. And Ed, can I come back to you just briefly, please, about the consultation? So it's 8 weeks, isn't it, from October? And then how does that then get presented back to us as the Strategic Planning Committee and to Council? What kind of decisions will we be making at that stage, depending on what the consultation has advised?
So yes, I mean the consultation would be from 8 weeks from mid-October to mid-December. There's questions here about, how we phrase that consultation. In my mind, I saw us presenting the consultation with a series of preferred allocations, as we set out in the report. There was then a question mark with the second best allocations as to how many of those members felt could be moved into the preferred allocations, or how many we wanted to potentially sit there as second choice and consult on them on that basis. All the other sites would potentially sit in a separate document. So the ones that we've dismissed and don't consider to be preferred allocations or second best choices, I envisaged would sit in a separate site allocations document, so that they would be there and people could comment on them, but we wouldn't necessarily be specifically seeking views on them. This is because I fear if we end up consulting on all of the sites, it becomes a very big nebulous consultation, and it just puts people off, because we'd be consulting them on hundreds and hundreds of sites and somehow asking them to comment on them all. I just don't think realistically people will, and it will put people off engaging with the consultation. And I think we need to be quite mindful of getting this down to a reasonable number of sites in each settlement, so that people can engage with this through a consultation process, but also so that they understand the views of the council, so they're not, wasting their time commenting and objecting to a site that we have no intentions of allocating, because we think it's hopeless as a site ourselves as a council. So I think there is a need to narrow these sites down. I wouldn't advise consulting on every single site. At most, consulting on the sites that we consider to be preferred allocations or second best choices in terms of what's on the front page, as it were, and the rest in the back documents within the sustainability appraisal, so that people can delve that deep if they want to. But the main sites, the ones we're actually seriously considering, are at the forefront for people to comment on without having to wade through everything else. I think that's necessary if we're going to make this an engaging consultation that people actually respond to. And then in terms of feeding that back, I think if we go down that approach, then feeding back people's comments on each of those sites becomes relatively easy to collate the views that have been expressed. Again, this comes back to how we ask those questions. We've had some discussions in the team, and I think we quite like an idea whereby we're presenting the site allocations or potential allocations in some kind of mapping system online, where people can view them by location and perhaps click on them and give a quick view, whether that's through some kind of traffic light system or a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But then they can also click in and potentially give us more detailed responses and actually write in a written response. Or it may be that we can highlight some key issues with those sites, and they can say whether or not they're comfortable with it in terms of highways, landscape impact, yes or no, so that we can get feedback back to members that's easy to collate and easy to understand the views of the communities on those particular sites. So that's really where we've got to with the consultation and how I envisage that working. But certainly we would envisage feeding all of those responses back to members in some collated report, early spring, I'd have thought realistically next year, so that we can then take that on board and that can inform production of the publication draft of the plan, which would be the next consultation stage. Hopefully that helps, Chair.
It does to an extent. My fear is that I don't think this committee is going to be ready to endorse preferred sites today. So that's why I'd suggested looking at it in a different way. Councillor Mike Allen, please.
I think it's been a fascinating and a very important discussion, because although I think, Chair, you're doing your very best to get us through this agenda, I think that Jess also has a point, Jess Bailey, Councillor Bailey, in respect of let's get the priorities crystal clear in terms of policy. The one thing that I would like to have, in addition to your recommendation, is a clear statement brought from page 14, which talks about great weight being given to conserving countryside, AONB, and so on. And I also think that we need to make clear in our recommendations that there should be a clear comment on the need for proper infrastructure to determine whether these suggestions are capable of being developed, and infrastructure in terms of water and sewage and health and schools. Now, we should be doing those things, but the general public needs to know during the consultation that we take those issues particularly seriously, and they need to understand, because they don't understand the complexities necessarily of the detail of the NPPF and so on, the way that you as councillors and officers do. It's better to have an upfront statement about our principles. And I think our principles ought to be protecting AONB, making sure that when we build, the infrastructure is actually going to be there. And given that, we have to acknowledge that there will be very difficult issues, very difficult decisions, if we can't get the government to change their views on pressing for the numbers that they want from us. The final issue is the whole structure of the population is shifting. And whereas we are looking at the geographic spatial strategy here, we do need to take account of the government shifting attitudes towards both design and accessibility, and whether those in fact will alter the numbers of properties that can be built on these allocations that are being proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mike, very much for that. I mean, I have inadvertently set out a much wider discussion, but I can really see how this has had some value, even though it takes us off agenda. Apologies for that, but I think we need to go down this path. Ben, Councillor Benningham, please.
Thanks, Chair. I hear your suggestion. I think it's sound, but I also hear what Freeman said, and that, you know, perhaps we've got to kick some of these sites out that are absolutely flawed, because otherwise we're asking people to tell us what we already know, that some sites definitely shouldn't be developed. But you know, I take on board your argument as well, which is perhaps laissez-faire, Chair, which is also so. Can I say that from where I'll be as quick as I can with bullet points, Chair. the hierarchy of tiers, we had a choice of one. I still see that as a profound flaw in our emerging local plan. That is not sound, where tier one, it is placed there because it's the biggest. That's not sound logic in my interpretation of strategic thinking. We also failed so far to consider the overall picture of this emerging local plan as a district, not the towns, but the whole picture, and we haven't done that. I've also been very concerned until recently that we failed to consider properly a new town, and I'm really pleased that that we're going to be looking at that as a council, and that you've decided to get advice on that. The reason I say that, I'd much rather that we discussed it, but it's better that someone else discusses it than there's no discussion at all. I heard what Councillor Ledger said, a compulsory purchase, and he's absolutely right. You know, if we are going to do a new town, it'd be nice to strike up an appropriate deal with the landowners, but as long as they get exactly the same money through compulsory purchase, then that's fair. What I don't want us to do is to make the same mistakes as we did at Cranbrook, without going into details there, Chair. Yes, and I hear about the centre of Exmouth and how that needs one rejuvenating, and Councillor Miller wrote quite a good, just short, brief email mentioning how, you know, there's a great opportunity to put affordable flats right in the centre of Exmouth. He's right. And I just want to point out, Chair, that 8 years ago, some of the sites we'll be looking at this afternoon were put forward as potential playing field sites. What the hell's that all about? How on earth can we justify 5 years later say, oh, well, we thought about putting playing fields there, but now we're going to put houses? I do ask members to remember that. Thank you very much, Chair, for your time.
You're on mute, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Ben. That's a great contribution. Just to remind members again about the title of this agenda item, which is site selection. So we've wandered, which is fascinating and valuable, and I'm sure will be captured in the minutes. So coming next to Councillor Pratt. Jeff, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to remember that it's the members of this committee to decide on which sites to include or exclude from the draft local plan to go out for public consultation. And I think that's the important thing. When we had the agenda, I arranged a meeting with the planning committee at Ottery St Mary Town Council. Roger Giles is on that committee, Vicky Johns, Richard Copus and a few of the others. And we discussed at length the sites which were preferred, and we came to a conclusion that there were 4 which were not up to scratch. There were 2 today which we, in particular, where they are in conflict with the neighbourhood plan provisions and the local plan provisions, and that is a concern. And in the end, the town council wrote a letter to the council here and sent copies, I believe, to all of the members of this committee, as did Vicky Johns. And quite honestly, the position at Ottery is that at least 2 of those cases should come out now, and we should discuss it. And that's the way I feel about it. We have a duty to not only the town councils, but the people who live in that town. And we're ducking it if we go on like this. There's another point too. this East Devon local plan was published in December of 2021. And I think we discussed it in early January. And many of the members of this committee wanted to deal with the town sites then. I don't know if you can remember that, but you did. And look at it now. We're here in August, and we're being rushed through this. So something to think about, perhaps. But that's my view, anyway.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff, Councillor Pratt. We can hear what's being said here. I'm thinking we don't have complete consensus amongst members of the committee, not yet. So I think I've planted a seed, but I think Councillor Pratt has put it best what the argument against doing it that way is. So let's just see, let's take a few more contributions, but can we just do no more than a minute each? So Councillor Hookway, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for letting me speak to the committee. Yes, I really, thinking about Exmouth, I absolutely support a great many comments. Nothing on the AONB. Nothing to do with sprawl. All the sites we had this morning for Exmouth are all greenfield sites. We have to consider brownfield sites for Exmouth. We have to consider what type of houses we're building. All the sites for this morning will be 3 or 4 bedroom houses that will be bought by people from outside the town, because people brought up in the town won't be able to afford them. They don't earn enough. We need to have 1 and 2 bedroom properties built in the town. And I also particularly want to draw and thank Councillor Howe for what he said about beginning, because the situation may be upon us sooner than we think. There was an article yesterday in the Daily Telegraph which suggested that Exmouth could become the next alternative Salcombe. Now, if we get that situation happening where we have very large numbers of people coming in, buying up holiday homes, then what chance do local people have, is my question. And I think we really do need to act fairly quickly to identify brownfield sites in Exmouth that we can develop to affordable housing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hoy. I suppose what I would say is, don't forget, again, we're looking at sites to be consulted on. They may or may not have extraordinary flaws in them that would emerge through that process, and we may already know some of those flaws. So that's the difficulty for this committee. Which way to go? Councillor Ledger, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think if we come to a point where we discount, we go through today and every single person discounts the sites that they don't like, I'll be saying that there'll be certain sites in Seaton that I don't like. I know Councillor Pratt's already said that there'll be certain sites in Ottery that he doesn't like. Councillor Lawrence will do the same for Wimpole. It will get very parochial. So I think for a way for us to move forward is just take an Axminster, for instance, because it's the first one on the list. Officers are suggested AXO 2, 7, 8, 10, 12, and then GHED 79, 80, and 83 are all yeses. They've then said that AXO 9 and AXO 11 are second choices. What I'd like to do is just clump them all into a yes pile. We take each individual town and we say, okay, all of the no's. Are there any ones out of there that committee can see as having any form of legs whatsoever? We chuck that into the mix and we consult on those sites. And then at least that way we've got a selection of sites to put forward that we've reduced the amount of sites that are going forward to consultation. So we've made Ed Freeman happy. And then 2, we've actually got something substantial that we can consult on, that we're not reducing it down dramatically to the point where we are left with absolute scraps and nothing on the table, and there being no hope of us meeting the government numbers that are set on us. I think that's the easiest way forward for today and the most productive for the committee to move forward with something tangible that we can come away with and say, okay, we've done our job today, plus we've given the voice to the communities to have their say. So can I make that as a suggestion, Councillor Arnott? We move forward with that and we're actually going forward with something, because I understand, I know it's 3:30.
Yeah, but that's right. But, this has been a long time coming. Can you just tell us again how you see, so taking Axminster as the model, and we're taking all the things that are in tier 1 and tier 2 and the backups and all the rest of it, how do you see us debating those, and then what conclusion do we move to from that debate?
So exactly as you said, Chair, with your recommendation that we put it forward for consultation. But if you take all the sites for Axminster, for instance, it leaves Axminster 01, Axminster, GHED 81, GHED 82 that are left as no's by officers. If you look at the appendix document, if any of the committee members want to say anything, to say we wish to have one of those consulted for, they see merit in it, we put that forward for consultation as well. Otherwise, we just leave it as the way that officers have done the background work, and we at least consult on them.
Okay, in which case, what we're looking at there is essentially making a decision as a committee that we are going with the officer advice at this stage on these as written, and the only really question other than that is, do we want to bring some back in that have already been rejected? I think because it's turning into an overlong debate, I think all members understand that now. And I think probably we should just go to, we're going to have to go to a vote on whether we agree that that's a principle we're prepared to go ahead with the discussion on today, and whether that has the backing of the committee. Then we can have the discussions as well. But essentially, we need to do it one way or the other. The other way is going to take, we'll be lucky to get through Axminster by tomorrow morning, I would say.
Could I just comment, Chair?
Yes.
If it would help reassure members, I'm sure Ed Freeman could clarify which sites and their references that they're being asked to have in, and identify for members on each section which ones officers did not consider appropriate to be put in, just so members aren't suddenly thinking, oh my golly gosh, I don't know which sites we're going to be talking about or which sites we're going to be voting on. That is just a suggestion.
Okay, I think that's a very wise suggestion. Perhaps what we should do then is litmus test this and go ahead with Axminster and see how that works for us. No, or there's people shaking their heads and.
I think. Sorry,
well,
Jess.
no, hang on. Let's just now. Can we keep it within the committee now, please? Because it is the committee who have to. So that's Councillor Bailey.
Need to decide on principles. Are you going to build? Do you want to look at applications that are going to be built on greenfield sites? That's just one principle. Agree on the principles, and then on that basis, kick them out. If you agree on that principle, kick them out. Whether we've got enough houses or not, I'll shut up because you don't want to hear from me anymore. But we do. It's a tail wagging the dog at the minute.
Well, what's the tail and what's the dog, Megan?
Well, it's just that you're going to be talking. You're going to be taking the officers' recommendations, whether members feel that those recommendations are correct or not. And it's. But
we're taking them to consultation. We're not taking them to
the members have to decide at the end of the day. You know, what this council, what our standards are, what our principles are, our standards and principles, which I think should override everything else. And if the government wants to have an argument about it, let them have an argument, and we'll have a public argument. That's how I feel. But I'm just stroppy. I know I'm stroppy, but I think we've just got to agree certain principles. And the ones that I've been looking at in Exmouth, most of the principles for them, I just don't agree with them. A lot of the things that are in there here for Exmouth.
Okay, can I stop you there? Can I just ask you a question? Do you believe the people of Exmouth have the right to be asked their views as well, or should it just come down to you and a few members? Really serious question.
No, I agree with that. But I think what we should be doing is going to the public with things that we as members are happy about, and that we're sticking to certain principles. And I think the public would accept that. The principle of not building on greenfield sites. I know I keep banging on about that, but that's what it's about to me. It's what Jess has been saying about the sprawl into the AONBs. Are we sticking to that as a principle, or are we letting developers come in and take advantage? And that's
okay. So how I understand this will go is that I really appreciate Ed's comment. I don't think this is going to confuse people at consultation at all. I don't think people living in Exmouth are going to be interested in making a comment about something in Axminster, Seaton, Sidmouth. I think they'll comment on Exmouth. And I think if the comment comes back, how dare you build on Greenfield? How dare you go anywhere near the OMB? How dare you do anything that hasn't got a proper plumbing system that doesn't relate to the sewage? That's what we need to hear. Otherwise, what we're doing, in my view, is we are basically, we're making our minds up for 170,000, 180,000 people.
But bear in mind that a lot of people don't understand. Do they understand, for example, about the sewage and how terrible that is? I have a personal experience of that.
No, well, let's stop. I know
Southwest Water aren't doing their job, so it's stuff like that. Anyway.
Yes, Mike.
I feel I have to interject, and maybe Ed will back me up, because everyone's going on about us as a council and our local residents. The truth of the matter is, if we go down the route of no greenfields, well, we won't have a local plan, because a local planning inspector will throw it out when he looks at it on first pass. Then we'll have no 5-year housing land supply. Then you'll be building all over the place. Yeah. So we have to be pragmatic. And as much as I agree with everything Megan said, everything Jess has said, and everything else, the reality is, if we don't have enough allocations at the end of the day for a local plan, it will not be found sound. And the planning inspector will be more than happy to throw it out. So if people want to take things out of this, I've got no problem with that. But then they need to find a replacement. And that's the issue Mr. Freeman's going to have, because that's the problem we're going to have to get him. And I can tell you then, no one's going to like it at that point. So I think your suggestion, and Councillor, oh God, I forgot his name.
Ledger.
Councillor Ledger's suggestion is pretty well spot on. Maybe we need a bit of talk on the quick individual sites as we go round Axminster, but not much. But we need to make decisions that will help this go to consultation, so we can have a plan that at least will not be thrown out on first pass. And that is the issue we should be facing. And everyone needs to realise it's not happy. It's not good. None of us will like it. But guess what? That's planning for you.
Okay. Can I bring in, or just before Jess, can I bring you in next? Can I bring in Councillor Hayward, please, at this stage?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, I agree with Councillor Howard. The fact is, it's out of our hands. And I'd just like to throw something in, which is, I often wonder when I sit on this committee, why we even bother having a strategic planning committee, because we're not in charge of it. It's someone in Whitehall. What Megan wants, the consultation Megan wants and needs is a general election. There's your strategic planning direction, full stop. But in the meantime, a government department is telling us and telling Ed and telling officers what planning numbers we have to put forward. That's the bottom line, and we just have to deal with that as best we can. And why any of us want to sit on these committee, I have no idea, because we all want the right thing for East Devon. And it's possibly the horriblest committee to sit on, because we're making decisions that profoundly will change East Devon forever. But we take that responsibility on board, but our hands are tied. It's like being a general and coming up with a great strategy for a battle, and then your Prime Minister, President says, I want you to fight everyone with catapults. That's it. There's your strategy. Do the best you can. It won't work, but we still try our best to make it happen. I'm looking forward to a debate about Axminster, and I've got a whole raft of things written down, as I am to all the other sites, because, lesser known, but I've done my homework. I've read 318 pages. And whilst I agree slightly with Councillor Ledger that actually, in order to get this done without having another 20 meetings like this, you're going to need a bit of an overarching approach. Actually, some discussion is needed, because on Axminster particularly, I have some profound issues with what's being proposed for this town, mostly going back to strategic planning decisions previously about the master plan and the urban extension, and strategic decisions that were made by this council have now been ripped up. They're worthless, and yet they were decisions that are made. So what was the purpose of them? Nothing. It didn't achieve anything, because government direction has changed, the world has changed, and we're being pushed in a certain direction. So some discussion is needed on a town by town basis. Partly what Councillor Ledger says, that you need to pick apart either take the no's out conclusively and then pick through the yeses, or say all the yeses are fine, go to consultation. But consultation is the first step, and then it will come back to us. And if there is an overarching absolutely not from every single person who responds, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means we've been given a direction and a steer of how we should consider, because we represent the residents. But this is going to need a lot more than the next 20 minutes to go through. It really is. This, and that's just the nature of strategic planning. I don't want to rush into these things. I want to be able to discuss Honiton and Ottery and Exmouth and Seaton and Sidmouth and the others in some detail whilst we select the sites, because there is that direct feeling that actually if you just select it now, whilst it goes out to consultation, you've set that direction of travel without thing. And I take on board entirely what officers do say, Chair, and what every member here has said. I think we just need to wind back a little bit and talk some of these through. That's my earnest belief. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor, thank you, Councillor Hayward. I'm going to have to ask, and it's a difficult question, Mrs. Shaw and Wendy as well. Assuming we're not going to get through the business on the agenda today, and we're not all of those towns, and that we may come up with a hybrid solution to this discussion where there's a sort of kind of, yeah, all right with most of them, but we really do need to have a serious conversation about some of them, and we could pilot that on Axminster in a minute. When would we be able to meet again that doesn't put us in big trouble with going out to consultation in October? Because from memory, I think at a previous meeting, we did say we wouldn't have any more meetings in August. So it would have to be early September, wouldn't it? But can anybody advise on that?
Yes, Chair. The recommendation of the committee, last strategic planning committee, was that if the agenda hadn't been finished today, it was to go to a meeting in September, but Wendy would have to advise on what date or what time in the month that would be able to be fitted in.
Okay, then can I thank you very much, Mrs. Shaw. Ed, can I ask you if that's where we end up going today, and we work hard in early September, that still leaves you enough time to get the consultation out in October, does it?
Well, yes. I mean, it's always going to be tight because we've got to set all of this up on a consultation software so that we can actually go out and show people all of these sites, as I say, on some form of mapping system through the consultation software and set up the plan. So there's a huge amount of work to be done. So the earlier we have certainty about what we're consulting on, the better. But obviously accept the resolution that was made in the last meeting about no further meetings in August. So I think we will have to pack early September with meetings to get it done, basically.
Okay, thank you. I suppose what could happen is somebody could start loading them up onto some software anyway, just in case. Right, I'm going to make a ruthless dictatorial chair's decision. I'm going to end that discussion now. I think we've heard everybody, and let us now move on the agenda and let us go to Axminster and see how far we get on that and what kind of discussion we get out of it. So my role, if we can get rid of all the yellow hands please at this stage, is to invite speakers who would like to speak on Axminster. I've got, I think, Councillor Andrew Moulding coming in first. I do know that Councillor Jackson, you're in the meeting, but I know you need to leave at some point. Do you? We may go beyond Axminster today, of course, but do you want to speak now or wait for a bit, Sarah? I can't hear anything. Okay, well, let's start off with Axminster with Councillor Paul Hayward, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, with all due respect, I mean, Councillor Mould had his hand up before me, but with Councillor Mould...
I did that, Paul, and then it dropped off. Was that an accident that you dropped off there?
Well, I'm happy to defer...
Hang on, Paul, let's just see what Andrew says. Your hand was up first, Andrew, if you'd like to go first. Or you're on mute there. Still on mute. Very much on mute. I've had you muted. I've got a man in China who does it, Andrew, for me. No, let's go with Paul first. Oh, no. Oh, God, no. You're still on mute. All right. Well, while Andrew tries to get himself on mute, let's come back to then, Paul. Thank you. Oh, now Andrew's on.
Go before Councillor Hayward. He's not the ward member.
He's a committee member, so I don't think it really matters which way round. But if you'd like to go, Andrew, absolutely, please do. Yeah. I saw your hand there. Yeah.
And are we going to go site by site?
I would say not. I would say your reflections on the sites. So, in other words, what we're looking for.
I'm going to have to flip through every page then and give you my synopsis of each one.
I think looking first of all at the current no's. Are there any no's that need to come back in? And then
what page are you looking at on the agenda?
Oh, blimey, I'm looking at all sorts of things here. Anybody got the page for Axminster there that can help me?
It starts on page 23 in the report, Chair.
Thank you, Ed.
It's 23 for the overview and 69 for the breakdown of sites.
Yep. Okay, I'm there.
Thanks, Ollie.
Right, so the first site is, I've got to refer to the site report at the same time.
That's fine. So what we're looking is, if we can, sites we have difficulties with that we would not be happy to go forward, if we can do it in that way.
Axminster 01 first or Axminster ED 79 first?
However it's listed, Andrew, on the agenda.
List on the early page, it's ED 79, so I've got to flip over and find that.
So essentially, as I said, we're going through these. If they look good to members, then they don't need much discussion. It's if they look bad, that's the ones we need to focus on.
Still trying to find my way through this. Yeah.
Don't worry.
So the first one is am I right in saying it's 79?
May I make a suggestion, Chair? It might be easier just to go from the appendix on page 69 and just follow the.
That's exactly what I was trying to suggest.
So yeah. Appendix 2 starts Axme 01.
Yep. Good. So Axminster 01.
Yep.
I very much agree with the recommendation that the site cannot be allocated, but part of the site could be used for employment.
Okay. Thank you.
And 2. North of Shoals, yes, I believe that could be allocated. It's been considered previously, and everybody has said that at some time it would be sensible for that to be developed. So I'm happy with that. Carpet factory site, that's a mixed use site. And yes, I would agree with that. The next one is land off Wick Lane. The recommendation there is that site should be allocated. That's 08. And yes, I can agree with that. The next one is Great Jackley, which I sort of class that in almost the same category as 08, and that's 09. And I would possibly be able to suggest that, yes, that could be a second allocation. Could even come forward as a first if it was so considered, but there are issues with the ancient monument in that area. And also, I think there are issues with accessibility to the town. The Scott Road building. It's always been suggested that as that is linked to the hospital, that it could be developed for a special residential accommodation for those who need care, constant care. So what's the name of it? What do we use it? Extra care housing. There's probably only about 10 dwellings there, but extra care housing could be considered for that. And then land on the southeast side of Axminster, that's Axminster 11. That's a big area there, and they've suggested second choice, and that could be a feasible one for a second choice. It's a great swathe of land in a very attractive part of Axminster, and it would be a shame to see it develop, a bit like Megan said, with greenfield sites being developed. But I think ultimately it will come, and it could have the potential to be involved with Axminster 04 in producing an inner relief road, which is quite a considerable suggestion that was considered by Devon County Highways 10 years or so ago. So Axminster 12, that's a small portion at the Coomfield end, and I don't see a problem with that. I agree with that. 79, that is the area at the top of Lime Road, and I would say yes, that could be allocated, but as with other portions that we've discussed, we must ensure that provision is made there so that if the relief road became a feasible option, that there was a road from Lime Road through that site into ED80 so that a relief road could be provided. I would say on that one. The next one is ED80, which is one that I think we discussed earlier this morning with the developer, and that is potentially for 200 dwellings. There are issues there with flooding, and again, there must be a provision for the potential relief road within that site layout. ED81, I don't think that's feasible at this time, and that's what the recommendation suggests. ED82, that's an interesting one really, because it does say the site shouldn't be allocated, but that sits right behind the Axminster industrial site, and all of those factories in that area have said they want to expand. And when ED82 was previously discussed, it was suggested that the relief road should go through that section, the first part of the relief road from the Chard Road. So the relief road could be provided, and employment sites could also be provided in that area with a buffer so that the Waycroft Manor could be protected from noise, etc. And ED83, we had a presentation on ED83 earlier on. There were one or two thoughts that we had there with the presenters, including, again, there's flood risk associated with that, and the need for the permissive path to be retained. But in principle, I would say, yes, that could be allocated. Have we got any more? No, that's a lot.
Thank you, Angela. It's a brilliant survey. I'm hoping that somebody was taking some notes on that, but we'll see. I should have just have said earlier, and forgive me, everybody, if there are members from outside of the committee who would have liked to have gone first, please do indicate, but I can't see anybody there at the moment. So I'll stick with the order of the yellow hands. Coming to Councillor Paul Hayward. Paul, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I mentioned earlier, referring back to the master plan document that strategic planning came up with, which outlined the urban extension. And I would argue, you know, you might have expected me to, that Axminster's done its fair share. We've had over 30% growth. And this morning, when I was listening to the speakers speaking, all of them who spoke passionately about their towns, and they were saying, you know, we can't have 168 houses. We can't have 147. Well, Axminster in A and B, preferred and second best, is having 1,115, about a 40% increase, far outweighing anything else other than Cranbrook. And I understand why Axminster's targeted, because it's not in the AONB, it's got all the infrastructure links, transport links, but it's at breaking point. Literally, you cannot move in this town. And adding another 1,100 dwellings, possibly 1,500 extra vehicles, it will just grind to a halt. It hasn't got the infrastructure. We haven't got enough dentists. We haven't got anything. And we are tucked away on the Far East. We're the smallest town, and yet we're being expected to take the biggest hit. But I come back to the master plan document, which was when we first started looking at this as a council, 650 new homes were on the table, 650. So clock that number in your head. And that was predicated on 8 hectares of land for mixed job generating commercial employment uses, social, community and open space facilities, a 210 place primary school, 8 hectare, which forms part of an overall 8 hectare employment allocation, nursery accommodation, children's services, north-south relief road. So here we are, fast forward to 2022, and we have 1,115 houses proposed with no employment land within that, no community social, and we have some open space, but that's basically being said, that's your mitigation. We're going to provide that. You can walk around it because that's your mitigation. No relief road, no primary school. So there's a word I would use, but I won't because we're on live, but Axminster is being turned over here. And actually what we're proposing is dumping huge amounts of dwellings on Axminster, and we get none of the benefit. None of the benefit. East Devon gets some council tax, the town council gets some council tax, but Axminster just gets numbers. We just get houses with no infrastructure improvement. So I might argue, actually, none of these at all. But we know in reality there has got to be some. So we come back to the issue of all of this was predicated on that you'll get a relief road. A relief road, in order to pay for that, you need 650. Then it became 850. And then GE83 suddenly got slowly moved into it, which I first found out by a comment on one of the applications. That's another 150. And a point was raised this morning, which I'd like to come back to. And it was raised earlier that we had 100 written down at the front page of that presentation. Then they said 150. And then the report you have in front of you here says 215. And the agent themselves says, I don't know where 215 came from. So perhaps can I pause for a moment, Chair, and ask why the report we have in front of us, the appendices, this report says 215. Where did that figure come from? Because you're suddenly loading on numbers here, there and everywhere. And then we have a new call for sites, and all these extra sites at the bottom of town get factored in. So, you know, what we're doing is you're just front loading Axminster for failure, because it's just impossible to load any more. We had very impassioned speeches from Ottery earlier, but I'm going to do the same on behalf of Axminster. What more do you expect this town to take? Where do you expect the traffic to come, the infrastructure, the social facilities, anything? And but this is the strategy laid down on East Devon, and this committee and myself and my colleagues here have to come up with these decisions. They're not palatable, but in some cases, they're not even viable. You know, this is the strategic thing. We are a strategic committee. Think strategically for 20 years ahead. How the hell is Axminster going to cope with this volume of house building. It's not. It will just it'll grind to a halt. You will not be able to move through this town. The whole principle is we were going to get a relief road to ease this problem, ease the problem that exists today. And that was before we built another 600 houses in the last few years. Now you're proposing another 1,100. Just not going to happen. So on this, I'm afraid, I would say none of them are viable because they cannot be delivered within the current constraints of this town. And I would welcome other views because it's just a fool's errand, I'm afraid. Thank you.
So that's a very interesting start to the debate. We have Councillor Moulding who's happy with nearly all of them, and Councillor Hayward who is unhappy with any of them. So this sums up the dilemma we're going to have going ahead with this debate, but debate we will have. Right. So yes.
Just on a point of information to Ed Freeman, could I just ask, are these what we're agreeing today solely sites for housing allocations, or can we put forward suggestions for employment allocations, or is it just solely housing that we're looking at today?
Through you, Chair, I mean, I think the report is focused on housing sites fundamentally. I think we do highlight in some places where sites would be best suited for mixed uses and bring forward some employment spaces as well as part of those. So yes, I think some of these sites would accommodate some employment spaces as well. Our intention was to bring forward a separate report looking at employment sites because we've got some sites that have been specifically put forward for employment purposes that are not addressed in this. And then there's to what extent some of these housing sites could accommodate some employment spaces as well, which would then obviously reduce the yield in terms of housing numbers, but potentially create a more sustainable form of development.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Councillor Leisure, for that point of information. Right, Councillor Jess Bailey, please.
Thank you very much. Can I, and I'm very glad that we're talking about the towns because I think they absolutely deserve careful consideration. Can I just ask Ed Freeman to start with? So a lot of the Axminster site assessments, they're recommended for consultation, but when it comes to landscape sensitivity, summary of findings not yet assessed. And again, they nearly all talk about, the sites within 1,600 metres, which I don't think isn't part of a 20-minute neighbourhood, walking neighbourhood, which is what we're trying to promote to stop car use. So can I just ask Ed Freeman, are you proposing that three questions actually. Are you proposing that we go out to consultation with sites where we haven't assessed the landscape sensitivity? Do you consider it acceptable that the sites are within 1,600 metres, whereas actually it should be within 800 metres? And third point, before I come back and make a more general point, I note very much what Councillor Hayward said about the numbers. I've got exactly that same comment that, we had the DCC talking about 20 houses and the box talking about, 20 houses, then it was 90 houses, then the document I think refers to 90, DCC referred to 20 and 200 or 150. So the numbers are all over the place. So could you just answer those questions, please, about inconsistent numbers, landscape sensitivity and 1,600?
Ed, are you happy to take those now? Or do you want to wait until there's a few more contributions?
No, Chair, happy to take those now. I mean, the 1,600 metre distance to services and facilities was what was agreed as part of the methodology of the HELAR in a report I brought several meetings ago, and does represent in our minds a 20-minute walking distance. So I think that is an accurate measure of a reasonable walking distance. In some cases, yes, the landscape impact work needs to be completed, and obviously that will need to be completed before we go out to consultation. But I'm not anticipating in terms of Axminster that those are going to be cases that are going to change our judgment necessarily in terms of those sites. As we've said, we're not dealing with AOMBs in this case. And in some cases, obviously, the landscape impact was assessed in some detail in the past. So while we haven't completed our assessment in terms of the current methodology, we've got assessments from the previous local plan in terms of the urban extension sites, and work was done in terms of GESP in terms of some of those sites. So I don't think it would change our recommendations, but we do need to tidy up those evidence documents in terms of that before the consultation goes. In terms of disparities between our numbers and those put forward by developers in their presentations, I mean, our numbers are based on a HELAR methodology that calculates based on normal densities, taking account of the character of the area and the developable area of the site, what a site can accommodate. So we've used a common approach to that across the piece. What you've had in terms of presentations is some developers saying that infrastructure or mitigation that we would have envisaged would have been accommodated off-site is actually going to be on-site. So for example, I think it was GHED 83 we heard a presentation on earlier, which I think Councillor Hayward referred to in terms of disparity between their numbers of 150 and ours of 215. Of course, they were trying to accommodate wetland features to deal with phosphate levels on site, whereas I think our assumption would have been that that would have been off site. So that's reducing the capacity of the site from what we had envisaged. Obviously, all of these capacities may well change over time as we determine things like how things are mitigated, whether or not we want to make any of these sites mixed use sites and incorporate employment spaces within them, etc. So there is some fluidity in terms of that, but ours are all calculated on a standard methodology for comparison purposes at least. Hopefully that answers the questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed. I think that, you know, the committee did talk about 1600 and the whatever it's called, the 20-minute neighbourhood, but actually when you go and look at it, it's based on the idea that people will only give up their cars, you know, on the basis that it's a 20-minute walk, and that doesn't mean 20 minutes to a facility and 20 minutes back. That's a 40-minute neighbourhood, and I think that that's a real problem. So I hope that that's something that you will have a look at again, because it may have been accepted by guests and we may not have picked it up before, but we don't want to create settlements where, you know, the 1600 is used as a yardstick and that's actually double what it should be. And I just wanted to just make a general comment, and it's very much picking up on what Councillor Hayward said, that I feel, you know, I feel aggrieved for Axminster. You know, that Axminster is not my local town, but I do feel that it's not right. And I feel concerned that we're obviously going to be putting, you know, too much pressure on the town, too much pressure on the services, and setting up problems for our own local plan, because we've got a hierarchy of settlements, and I don't want to load Exmouth with you know, a disproportionate number of houses, but you know, potentially we're going out to consultation where, and I certainly don't want to see them all around the edge of Exmouth, but we haven't addressed, we've got a hierarchy of settlements, we're progressing a local plan, and we're not applying our hierarchy of settlements to our housing, and we're going out to consultation, and this is just storing up problems, I think. And the fundamental problem for me is that we haven't addressed what we can do in the centre of Exmouth, and that really is a problem, because now we're trying to, you know, go out to consultation on, you know, Axminster, in the same way that Ottery has taken way more than its fair share now, and I know Axminster has already 40%. I mean, you know, that's not reasonable. And if I was in Axminster, I'd be really unhappy about it. And I know, you know, an Ottery in the same way, I've heard what everybody has said, and I very much feel the same, that that's going to take a disproportionate, you know, set to take a disproportionate. So we have to look again at our hierarchy of settlements and try and get the sites in the places that they need to be. And I really do feel, and I'm sorry if this is slightly ranty, that we're just doing the easy. It's easy. It's easy. The developers want to build in the fields. Redeveloping in the centre of Exmouth, getting the houses that people need near the facilities is much harder, but we haven't even really tried yet. So please can we, and please can we not punish communities like Axminster and Ottery St Mary, and you know, and I know I can see how difficult it is here to get a doctor's appointment and everything. So you know, looking at 700 for Axminster, that just does, and 300 for Exmouth, that just doesn't seem reasonable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bailey. I could be really interested to see where we land at about 4:30 on this. Councillor Benningham, please. Ben.
Thanks, Chair. In my opinion, Axminster is the most vulnerable town in East Devon. And I attribute that to previously its lack of sustainability. Part of that's because it's remote, and I think it's very important that we put that right so to ensure it is sustainable. And the evidence I have of that is, so over the last 25 years, if you look at where recession has in our country has been so deep that it's hit Devon and East Devon, the town that suffers most, in my opinion, each time is Axminster. Through loss of jobs, shops closing, and I believe whatever we do now, we should be making sure that Axminster is sustainable as possible. However we do that, of course, it is more difficult to put in place. Yes, I believe that Axminster does need a relief road. You just drive through Axminster town centre mid-morning. On a bad day, you're there for ages. And I think that is important. But I don't think it's necessary at this point in time for us to say all of that is going to be paid for through houses. I look forward to levelling up. I never, as you know, and I still don't, and I won't be supporting funding for Deanon Way extension through levelling up. But if it were to help Axminster become more sustainable and vibrant and its town centre work, then I certainly would be supporting 100% Axminster's search for levelling up funding for that. Yes, housing may help that, but for me, for Axminster, the most important thing is creating more jobs, especially for every single house that you provide. You must provide a job, because otherwise you're undermining that sustainability for Axminster. It's quite unique. Well, it's either unique or it's not, and I think it's unique. And I'm sure we can come up with the answers. It'd be nice to say, let's add up Councillor Moulding's score with, Councillor Hayward's score and divide by 2. That must be the answer. Sadly, it isn't that simple, because whatever number of houses you provide in Axminster, you've got to have the sustainable jobs to prop that up as a community. Otherwise, you will undermine the climate emergency agenda by commuting left, right and centre, which takes place now, but we have to decrease that. So I wish Axminster the best of luck in how it makes sure that it's more sustainable than it is at the moment, because in future recessions, I don't want to see them suffer again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ingham. You can get the train out of Axminster. I was going to say that. In fact, if we run out of petrol, it might be the only way out of Axminster, the way things are going. Councillor, so it's been a very valuable discussion so far. This is about Axminster. If I can just encourage members just to focus on that. So, Councillor Mike Allen, please.
Thank you, Chair. The basic problem in looking at growth rates is that we've all been through it one way or another. I know that Honiton had a 40% plus growth rate at one stage, and we've never really recovered, especially when we halved our industrial space. The issue for Axminster is inconsistency in these evaluations. For my concern is that GHED 82, which can be industrial space and should be industrial space because the local businesses would take up the space and expand, was turned down on the basis it was too close to Waycroft, and yet GHED 83 was made acceptable even though it goes closer to Waycroft. So I sometimes wonder how we arrive at some of these evaluations. I recommend that we include the GHED 82 as an industrial site, and totally endorse what Ben Ingham was saying about making sure that if we build houses, then we build jobs. If we don't do that, well, all we're doing is making sure that Axminster becomes non-sustainable, and then it will fail at evaluation, because that is a core principle of NPPF. We enshrined that in the last local plan. We made sure that it was one house, one home, and one job. We decided in a wisdom to throw that away. And in this example, you've come straight up against that problem, and it won't work if you carry on like this. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mike Councillor, for that. It's an interesting point about, isn't it? I was noting what Ben had said, Councillor Ring, about one house, one job. But it never, as you say, it never happened. The question is, can it happen? But that's a bigger subject, isn't it? Can we go there?
We got pretty close, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. I think post-pandemic, post-COVID, post-Brexit, post whatever the hell's going on in the world, I don't think we're going to get there in the next couple of years. But Councillor Philip Skinner, please.
Thank you. And I don't know if people remember when I touched on with one of the Axminster sites about employment land when I was economy portfolio holder. What was really key, particularly for Axminster, and absolutely with Axminster, is the same. And the point has been made, and it's been well made, Chair. And I do hope that this lands, because there are members, other councillors suggested that we need to build housing on brownfield sites. Well, my answer to that is that if you build housing on brownfield sites and you diminish the employment abilities and the capabilities for business to growth in the towns, we're almost so-called putting the rope around our own neck, and the ropes just get stretching harder and harder. And the point has been well made now, Chair, on from starting with Ed, and I think 2 or 3 councillors have picked up on it now, that we need to have imbalance. And I've always learned this for over 20 years. We need to have imbalance between what comes first, the employment land or the housing. And where strategic planning is gone, and I've said it before on many occasions, but we always seem to focus on the thing that the government is giving us the diktat in the housing numbers that we have to find, when in actual fact they come in balance. And I've always said we should start with the infrastructure, then do the employment space, and then whom are we building the houses for? But we always do it the wrong way round. We start building all the houses first, and then we try to fit in everything else after that. The misnomer that we're not going to build on greenfield sites is just nonsense if you don't. And I believe Councillor Howard touched on it earlier. If we don't build on greenfield sites, well, we're done. We'll just be lost in the wilderness and all the rest of it. And don't forget the one thing that hasn't been said yet, Chair, and that is after this committee meeting, we're going to start talking about if the housing numbers are going to be short in the areas that we're going to have in our major towns, we're going to start going out to our villages, and we're going to start asking the villages. And in a minute, the villages will start being expected to take more housing numbers than what they really want to take. The Chair, even before your time, it's almost like deja vu, these local plans. We go through this whole process every time. And we did exactly the same with Cranbrook. We did all this, and once we went out to the villages for them to take more numbers, Chair, we ended up whereby nearly the whole of the East Devon district recipients were up in arms about saying, we don't want this and we don't want that. We have to manage this and manage the numbers. I do feel, Chair, that there is a place to be said whereby asking central government again is, have we got these numbers right? And I don't like doing this, because I just think to myself, in some ways, they give us the numbers and it's do or be damned. But in some ways, are we really looking at where we are when the inward migration of people is not the numbers that they were? So the consensus, I believe, maybe, do we need the growth numbers that we've got? But of course, every time we turn on the television, we've got a housing crisis. The housing crisis has been predicated by us not building enough homes over the last, and that's over the last 10 years. It's happened over the last 40 years. Let's face it, because people don't want housing in their backyard. I think the way that we've put it forward and the way you suggested, Chair, at the start, and if you remember, I supported what you said about getting these forward and then get into the consultation and see where that was. I'm in exactly the same place as what that is now. And as much as I absolutely understand what Councillor Hayward is saying, and he's absolutely bang on the money, but so is Councillor Moulding, because Councillor Moulding also understands that the housing numbers are going to come. But what Axminster needs, and we're focusing on Axminster on this debate, is the bypass that links around it to keep it sustainable. So I think to myself, I'm looking at all these sites that have been put forward. I'm going to personally, if we're going to make a vote, and I take it at some point we are, Chair, at some point we're going to get to a place of accepting some of these houses, then to these sites, and the ones that Councillor Moulding has put forward, I'm going to support. And as you quite rightly said, let's get it out to consultation and let's see what the public have to say. And then it comes back again for us to actually set the scene. So that's the place where I'm at, Chair. And I think we're going to, if we're not careful, we're going to end up by throwing some of these sites out. And I just do a buyer beware here for members. We're going to end up in the next process, going back to the villages, and then we'll just have just about everybody wound up and upset. And then we'll be doing exactly what we did with Cranbrook. We then came back. Didn't want to do that. It wasn't very popular politically. So we come back and whopped them all into a new town. And that's where we go. Well, I hope we just think a little bit easier than that and taking the easy path. It isn't easy to do this, but I believe there's lots of merit in what the officers have done and how they pointed us out. So I'm going to be supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. I'm just going to go out of order a bit of the yellow hands from people who've already spoken. Councillor, and please, again, can I just stress this must be about Axminster. And I enjoyed what Councillor Skinner had to say there, but it didn't actually really refer to any sites in Axminster. So, Councillor Chapman, please.
Thank you, Leader. Not being a member of the Planning Committee, one thing that struck me, which I would like members to know of all the developers that we heard today, not one of them put forward anything for the residents. It was housing or employment land or roads or flooding, nothing about playing fields, allotments, clubhouses, no shop. You know, living in Brixington, we've taken on loads and loads of developments up here. And last time I spoke at planning, which was some time ago, on the Goodmoors farm, I now have 5,000 residents up here with no local shop, no local playing field, and no local doctor's surgery. And that is what the public asked for on Goodmoors farm, which they didn't get. And saying you can walk so far to a shop. If you're living on the other side of Deanham Way, you're not going to let your 9-year-old go to the local shop all the way down in Brixington to get a paper or some milk for mum and dad on a Sunday morning. It doesn't work. We're not building.
Encourage you back to Axminster and away from Goodmoors.
Yeah, well, yeah, yes, but nothing in Axminster is there for the people that are buying the houses for their kids. There's nothing there. There's no shops. There's no playing fields. There's no clubhouse. So on a Sunday morning, you know, Dad has to put them in the car to take them somewhere. Years ago, when you were building 200 houses, you had a village, you had a pub, you had the shops, you had the school, you had the church, and you built villages. Now it is just housing estate upon housing estate with no infrastructure. And this is every single one that I have sat here and listened to today. So I just wanted to make everyone aware.
We hear that. I think before an Axminster member leaps in, particularly I suspect Councillor Moulding, there are huge numbers of sports recreation, swimming pools, football clubs, cricket clubs, and everything in Axminster. So I should just say that in case there really are. So take your other points well taken. But yeah.
Well, we did.
So
Leader, we did in Exmouth. We're chock-a-block. We haven't got enough because we've outgrown it, and that's the danger they're going to get in Axminster. They might have a lot now, but when you've built all those houses, they'll be under pressure.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Can I come to Councillor? I'll come to Andrew next. Councillor Moulding, briefly, if that's okay, Andrew.
Sorry, Chair.
That's okay. You're on.
I'm on. Yeah, there we go.
Gotcha.
Yes, I really wanted to comment on one or two things that have been mentioned, and particularly by Councillor Hayward. One of the problems that Axminster would have if it stood still is that without growth, it would stagnate. And the businesses in the town centre are really keen to see Axminster grow. Now, the applications that have been presented and are before us today would actually give the opportunity for 3/4 of the relief road to ultimately be delivered. There are 3 sites that we have suggested should go forward, and they will be able to deliver 3 parts of the relief road, and then the final piece of the jigsaw could ultimately come forward. And there is such a depth of industry in Axminster, Axminster Tools, Axminster Carpets. There's a number of industrial small businesses in the town, as Councillor Dan Ledger will know, because his father's in one of them. And there's a whole raft of small businesses in Axminster, and they're looking to grow. And certainly, as far as employment is concerned, Axminster is well breached. As you rightly say, Chair, no playing fields. Well, that's a joke, because Axminster is very well breached as far as leisure is concerned. And of course, the other issue that we are desperate to see restored in Axminster is a school sixth form. We had a school sixth form. That school sixth form will only come back to Axminster if Axminster is prepared to grow. And what we've got to remember is that because of the phosphate mitigations, none of this is going to happen overnight. But we have to put things in place so that when Axminster can really move forward, when a relief road can be delivered, when the development can take place so that we don't stagnate, then we are ready to go. And Axminster is ready to go. It just needs to put everything in place so that once phosphate mitigation is sorted out, we can move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moulding. I should come to your fellow ward member next, please, Councillor Sarah Jack.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping you can hear me. I've lit up this time, which is a good start. Thank you.
All hearable.
So I wanted to come to one of the points made by my colleague just now with respect to growth. All of our communities do need to grow. There's no getting around that. There's a requirement for housing, the right type of housing, admittedly. I think the issue that we have here is Axminster has reached a point where there has been substantial growth, but there hasn't been the appropriate infrastructure to support it. And so the stagnation has come despite growth. It's already here. And until there is an appropriate solution for infrastructure, and I'm not just talking about the road system, all these plans will do is exacerbate the problem. And we have a situation where nearly half of the plots on the table at the moment are ones that are either master plan plots or closely associated with master plan plots. And it really wasn't all that long ago that strategic planning looked at the master plan and said, categorically, that shouldn't be happening. You need to go back to basics, reassess it, and it certainly shouldn't proceed without forward delivery of the infrastructure that was laid out there. Well, we're now in a situation where we're looking at those plots again, but because it's being framed in a different way, we're looking at piecemeal delivery of something which may not deliver that infrastructure. Not only that, but because you're dealing with them as individual small sites, the requirement for other amenities, Section 106, for example, SIL, that's much more diminished. Throw into place the phosphate mitigation requirements, and there simply won't be enough money in the pot to deliver those things as well as. And so we're in a situation again where, in all likelihood, in order to deliver those sites, it's going to come with even less infrastructure, and the problem is only going to get worse. I hate to see this happening because I do see that there needs to be some growth. I don't think that's the linchpin. I think the infrastructure is the linchpin. It needs a strategic, fresh approach. What we've done in the past hasn't worked. We need to start learning from those mistakes. We need to stop falling into those same traps. And it requires a strategic view that looks at the whole of the town and its needs, not just its housing needs. That needs to not be the bit that comes first. It's done that. We're at this point, and now it's crippled, absolutely crippled. So I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse, and I'm grateful to Councillor Bailey for some of the points that she raised as well. I am very, very uncomfortable with a great deal of the plots on what would have been the master plan site. I'm a little bit alarmed to see that plot 82 is being proposed potentially for some housing when actually it was only ever designated for employment space previously. And I really, really hope the committee consider that very, very carefully, because the impact of what happens from here on out could be devastating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Ledger, well, actually, can I bring in our Vice Chair next, please? Councillor Davey. Ollie, please.
Okay, Chair, I'll be as quick as I can because this is a bit of generality really, but we've heard a lot about infrastructure in the context of Axminster, and I'm sure it's going to come up elsewhere. And I was interested in what Councillor Bailey said about the 20-minute neighbourhood. And I'd been accepting that it was the distance you could walk in 20 minutes, but she is absolutely right. I've just downloaded, and I thoroughly recommend this, the Town and Country Planning Association Guide to 20-Minute Neighbourhoods. It's a fascinating read, and I've only skimmed it because I just did it while we were in the meeting. But they say that 800 metres is a more likely reasonable walking distance. I think people will cycle further. I was basing this on myself, and I'm quite happy to walk for 25 minutes into Exmouth Town Centre, but that's just because I'm too mean to pay for parking. But it isn't just about adding your housing within 20 minutes, however you judge it, of existing facilities. It's about designing that into those developments from the start. And I think all the developments we've seen today, you just have to look at the layout of them. They're all predicated on one house, at least one car. And unless we really begin to think about 20-minute neighbourhoods in the context of every development that we do, and our developers begin to get that, we are simply going to be compounding the problem by adding on existing housing to neighbourhoods that aren't 20-minute neighbourhoods. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, Ollie. It's very, very interesting. When I occasionally put my pedometer on, as my wife tries to get me to hit my 10,000 steps a day, which isn't very often, the maths for me, even just shambling along as I do, is that I do a mile every 20 minutes because I'm doing 3 miles per hour. So I'm not quite sure how that gets down to 800 metres. I could probably crawl 800 meters in 20 minutes. But anyway, just sort of adding a dissenting view there. Coming next to Councillor Howe. Mike Howe, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm hearing an awful lot of good comments, and I understand them. But the reality is virtually none of these allocations in any of these sites are within 20 minutes. So what are we going to do? Because, you know, it ain't going to happen. Best will in the world. Much as it should, much as it must, it isn't going to happen. And Councillor Arnott, Chair, you know, your point is well made. Actually, you're about a mile. You know, about a mile is about right, but quite literally 800 yards, you know, is the recommended. But the reality is none of that can be achieved. So where do we go from there? Great aspiration, great for work in the future. But then we come to Maddie's comments, and this relates to Axminster in particular, but also the other sites. Because they're right, these are allocations for housing, but our other policies that will run alongside the allocations will deem where the neighbourhood centres will be, where the roads will be, you know, in particular with Axminster, because there needs to be that spinal link starting to be created. Those are the other policies that sit behind it, and that's what makes the community work. We have to get those right alongside these allocations. But fundamentally, and I come back to it, it's fine if we say no to things. I've got no problem with that. But you're going to have to say yes to it somewhere else. And if you make the rules up to say no green fields or 20-minute rule as it should be interpreted, none of our villages will achieve that because they haven't got a doctor's surgery. Most of them haven't got schools. You know, one or two of them have got train stations, but, you know, and a pub. They're worse than sitting in Axminster or Exmouth or even Sidmouth. We really need to look at because they haven't got anywhere near enough allocation to sort. So we have to be pragmatic. You know, Paul Hayward, Councillor Hayward's made an excellent speech, you know, as is everyone else, but we need to get down to this. I'm happy. I'm looking for someone to make a recommendation. Where are we going? Because at present, I don't know what I'm going to be voting on, but because I haven't got the choice yet. Can someone give us a choice?
Thanks, Mike. Councillor Dan Ledger.
Thanks very much, Chair. Can I help Mike out then and just say that we propose exactly what the officers are recommended to go out to consultation. I don't see there being any other sites that are no's at the moment that are worthy of being dragged into yeses. The only one that I do agree with Councillor Allen on his point on GHED 82. That is a prime site for employment land, and that's why I asked for clarification from Mr. Freeman earlier, especially with the potential loss of Axminster carpets. If that does come forward with the site, we do need, as part of the placemaking of Axminster, an additional employment site, and I see that as the most suitable coming forward. So if that could go into the employment side, that would be my proposal.
Excuse me, Chair, I'm terribly sorry, Councillor Ledger, but you did declare an affects non-registrable interest, and therefore you can't really take part in the debate that may involve the sites that you declared those on. So unless there's somebody else who could take that motion forward.
Yes, I will take that motion forward for Dan Ledger.
Thank you.
And I'll happily second it.
Thank you very much. It's pure technicality. I do apologise.
Councillor Ledger, do you want to have a violent argue back against
No, that's absolutely fine. I've looked again at the map of the Axminster. It doesn't actually cover the area of land, so I would have been fine anyway. It's just it's a very small map to look at, so I wanted to be sure.
No, safe, you know, discretion, better part of valor and all that. I think, thank you, Mrs. Shaw, for bringing that point, and thank you, Dan, for offering a proposal kindly picked up by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Howe. Councillor Bailey, please.
Just a quick point, really. So all of this, if we had more information about the new town, then we would know whether we need to be going out to consultation and allocating these sites, because we don't actually really know how, what rate they're going to come forward, how many there's going to be. And so that might actually quite impact on this. And so I think, I would have liked to have had that first. And I'm glad that you're a really fast walker, Councillor Arnold. But the research does say that most people won't walk for 20 minutes, and that's kind of 1,600 there and back. Thank you.
So aged 20 against Sebastian Coe at Crystal Palace, running for the University of Exeter. I did 400 metres in 51 seconds. I could do 800 metres in, well, frankly, about 2.5 minutes. That slowed down.
Not carrying a bag of shopping, you couldn't.
No. Well, that's what I'm carrying now on the front. But anyway, that's a really interesting point about walking rates, but a bit of a distraction. So we have got a proposer and we've got a seconder. But what I'm unsure of here is, again, be grateful for some advice from Mrs. Shaw, is given that probably we're going to wrap up after this, having used Axminster as an extremely useful, sort of way of testing what we're doing here, is it premature to make a resolution about it tonight? And is that unfair on Axminster, given that we're going to have to come back in a couple of weeks' time, early September, first week in September, and do the other towns? I don't know how that sits, Mrs. Shaw.
If you're minded to take this as a straw poll of members present, that gives you an indication and that Ed Freeman can take forward, then when we come to, after we've discussed all the sites, then you can take the a totality of a recommendation incorporating the straw polls for a final vote. How does that sound?
That sounds very good, as long as it's a firm straw poll. We have a rigid straw and we don't reopen the whole of Axminster next time. That would be okay then. I think we've probably heard enough on that. I'd be very happy to go to a vote if members are agreeable to do that. So if you can take us to a vote, please.
Thank you. Members, please press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, or raise your electronic hands if you're abstaining from the vote.
For those watching online, the vote is currently underway. Okay, so currently we have 9 votes in support, no votes against, and no abstentions. So that's carried. Right. Thank you very much. This has been a day none of us will forget. But I am mindful, I really am respectful of the fact that so many of you have been through all this before. I'm looking at the faces of Councillor Howe and Councillor Allen and Councillor Skinner and so forth. So, and Councillor Moulding. I wonder whether we should leave it at that today then, committee, just by sort of nodding heads. What do you think? Should we break off at this point? Okay. So then it will be down to Wendy, please, to try and find the earliest convenient gathering point, first or second week of September, I suppose. But
yeah,
that'll come through. Yes, Councillor Howe.
I don't really want to disturb you, but I do want to make a recommendation for the next meeting, and it relates to what Councillor Bailey was saying.
Yes.
I think at the beginning of next meeting, it would be good for Mr. Freeman to set out the new town perspective build out so we can understand why he's got 2,500. It probably won't be any more. So we've got a more realistic view of the new town is only going to be that and not any bigger, if you get my meaning. Otherwise, we're going to have to look for 2 new towns, and that'll be even more interesting. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's not really part of the extension to the time available to debate this agenda, I don't think. But I mean, if he's kind enough, for an informal briefing at the beginning, perhaps, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it would just help the understanding of the new town at 2,500 is probably realistic, and we probably won't get any more, as we proved with Cranbrook sort of thing.
Okay. Okay.
Through you, Chair, I'm happy to provide a verbal update on that at the start of the next meeting. It might be useful for me to do a more broad update in terms of other supply sources, I suppose, because there's been a number of suggestions about how brownfield sites within town centres might help us. So it might be useful for me to comment on that as well as useful context to the wider discussion around the other towns.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ed. Ed, I think there was a point you were interested in making about, I don't know if it's worth making now, about points made earlier about Exmouth Town Centre and brownfields. Do you want to come back to that now, or save that for another day?
Well, that was the point I was just referring to, and I think it might be useful context at the start of the next meeting.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. Well, in which case then, thank you very much, all members of the public.
For 1 second, just for 1 second. Could we next time come back to that consideration of principles? Because I think the committee was very concerned to establish overarching principles on which we should come to the general public and say, these are the things that are most important to us, like AONBs, infrastructure, etc. And we did pretty well have a general acceptance of that.
I'm happy to have it to schedule some time on that, but I think, my view is, I think it's implicit in the reports in any case. I think the best time to do that, Mike, would be after we've made these decisions, when what we want to do is inform the wording of the consultation. So if we can get through the towns first, and then we'll make some time, definitely, for the principles. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want a quick?
Yes, Chair, just very briefly, sorry to come back. That's coming back on what Mike Howe was saying. I disagree. I'm quite happy for Ed Freeman to come back and brief us on the new town, but to tell us the number when we're just going out to consultation is a nonsense. You know, that's trying to limit an argument before we've even collated the evidence. So I noted what Ed said. He'll update us, but there's no need to limit it. That's the whole point of a consultation, isn't it? That obviously we're just about to pay for. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. I know that two more people would like to make 15-second contributions. Councillor Bailey and then Councillor Lawrence. Jess, please.
Is it possible, I don't want to make more work for Ed, that he could just email us what he's going to say, because it's always helpful to read it in advance without making much more work and lots of detail. But and I think the principles are important. Thank you.
Okay, noted. Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I'm pleased we've gone down this route, because I don't think we could just rely on the word of the officers. I don't think the residents of East Devon would be happy for us just to do that, because we are a committee. I'm also pleased that Councillor Moulding spoke on behalf of his own ward, and I think we should listen more to the people who are on the ground in their own ward, and we followed through with what he suggested. So I think it's win-win all round. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, win-win, and let us hope that Chelsea can follow that model throughout the season. I wouldn't put any money on top four if I were you, Councillor Lawrence. Right, now I must formally close the meeting. That brings the meeting to an end, and I'd like to sincerely thank everybody, including members of the public, for their attendance. But can I please remind members that until Democratic Services tell us that the live stream has stopped, you can still be seen and heard.